book of Hebrews, chapter 11. And we're going to go right to verse 22.
11:22.
And you see that mark? It should, well, if you got a King James, you should see a mark right between the number 22 and the word by faith. And that mark actually means this is it's like a new concept, a new idea, a new paragraph, if you will. So you can see that the last three verses have that little mark. I'm just letting you know what that little mark is. So it's a new idea, okay? And so we're going to a new idea here, and that idea is verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. Now what that refers to is, if you remember when Abraham when God made that covenant with Abraham, and he said, your seed will be enslaved for 400 years, but then I will judge that nation and I will bring them out. That's why they were looking for that deliverer, Moses, right? Well, that's what this verse is referring to. By faith, when Joseph died, he made mention of the departing of the children of Israel. He was haircut. Woo! He made mention of the departing of the children of Israel. Departing from Egypt is what's in reference there. And he gave commandment concerning his bones. What was the commandment? The commandment was he did not want his bones left in Egypt.
That's right.
And you know, Egypt is like a symbol of the world. The promised land is kind of a symbol of heaven, right? Or the grave is how we enter into that. We have to go through death and then resurrection, right? That was a concept that you see through the Bible about being buried or brought together after death. We see that in Jesus' day when he went down to paradise. And Lazarus was there, and so was Abraham. Right. And they were all united. They were all brought back together. Well, we have that hope as well. When we go to heaven, we'll see people that we met down here, maybe family members or not, and there's going to be people there, and we'll recognize each other, we'll know each other. I think we're going to know each other.
Together.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's what it's referring to here. So let's go to Acts also, because Acts kind of ties in with this Hebrews 11. Acts chapter 7, we're not going to read a lot here, but we're going to start at verse 8. So Acts chapter 7, verse 8. And he, God, gave him the covenant of circumcision. He's talking about Abraham, right? So God gave Abraham the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begat Isaac and circumcised him the 8th day. And Isaac begat Jacob. Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him. And actually, if you want a title or a reference of what Joseph's life represented, the main point is God was with him. It's a glorious story because no matter what you're going through, Joseph had it worse. But all that he went through, God was with him. God had a plan. And we see God's plan working out in his life. So patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him and delivered him out of all his afflictions, gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. We're going to see when we're going to go and look at some things about that's said about Joseph's life here. But one of the big deals is he was sold as a slave. He ended up in prison. We're going to see all this. And he ended up sitting on the right hand of Pharaoh himself. He was the second in command of all of Egypt. That's
big.
That's big. That's right. He's like vice president, yeah.
Right.
And with everything that went with it. I mean, all the glory that went with it. Verse 11, now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and in Canaan, and the great affliction, and our fathers found no sustenance. In other words, there was a great affliction. There was this dearth. There's a famine. But when Jacob heard that there was corn in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first. And at the second time, Joseph was made known to his brethren, and Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him, and all his kindred, 75 souls. So Jacob went down into Egypt, and he died, and our fathers, and were carried over into Shechem, and laid in the sepulchre that Abraham bought for a sum of money of the sons of Emor, the father of Shechem. So what is all this saying? It's talking about how during the days of Joseph, there was this great dearth, and then famine, and there was no food. So Jacob heard that there was food in Egypt, so he sent his sons down to Egypt to get it, to buy some, right? Well, the prophecy said that they had these Israelites, that the offspring of Israel, or offspring of Abraham, had to end up in Egypt. And this is what God used. And this was all part of God's plan. You look around, and if you had a great famine or a great monster hurricane or something, depending on where you live, you might think, well, that's the work of the devil. But God can use evil works, what we would call evil. He could use that for good, and it may even be part of his plan. Right. Your house could be wiped out, and it's part of God's plan. Now, he said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Right. He said he would meet your needs. But he may be thinking, you don't need that house. Right. Maybe he wanted you to move and you wouldn't move. And so he just wiped out everything that was keeping you there.
He might give you something better.
And that's what we see in Joseph's life. We certainly see that in Israel's life, all the tribes of Israel. So Jacob did go down into Egypt, and he died in Egypt. And many of the fathers died. And their bodies were also carried into in the land of Canaan, in this sepulchre that Abraham bought. We talked about that, remember? He didn't own anything in the land of promise, but he bought the one tomb and all the land around it. He bought it so he could bury his wife, right? So let's go to Genesis chapter 37. So that basically gives you a summary of everything. Genesis 37 will amplify and give us some details about this. And I believe these scriptures are very rich. Genesis chapter 37 verse 1. And we're going to mention Jacob, and then we're going to get into Joseph. So, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And that was the promised land, right? Right. But it's before they're entering into the promise. Remember, Joshua is the one who finally brings the offspring of Israel into the promised land, right? After their wilderness journey. So these are the generations of Jacob. Now, Jacob and Israel is the same person. When you see Jacob, you see Israel. It's the same person. Remember, his name was changed. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. the fact that it tells us that Jacob especially loved this child, Joseph. He was proud of him. He always favored him. He was the firstborn son of his favorite wife.
Right.
Remember, he had the two wives and the two concubines, but he was the favored son, the firstborn son of his first wife. And in fact, at that time, it was the only son, because remember, his wife died in childbirth. It says he made him this coat of many colors. Now, we don't really know what that means. In fact, having the coat of many colors, we've got some idea, because those of us who when we were young, we went to Sunday school, and of course, Sunday school material might show him having this coat that went all the way down to his ankles with the stripes, if you've seen that. Or, I saw the real thing, because I went downtown Chicago, and I saw at the Opera House, I saw Donny Osmond, and he had the Technicolor dream coat, and so, but I don't know if that was authentic either. But we don't really know what it was, but we know it was enough that it made the whole rest of the family really jealous. And I think it's rightly so. I don't think a father should go to extremes to put one child over another and say this child is better than you.
Shouldn't be no differences.
So that's what was happening. But Jacob just loved his son so much. And he gave him special treatment. The other brothers were out there, doing their sheep thing, right? Because these were shepherds. And Jacob actually sent Joseph to spy on them. Go down there, see what they're doing, and give me a report. And Joseph brought back an evil report. In other words, he squealed. Right? He squealed on him. They weren't doing they weren't where they were supposed to be, and they weren't doing what Jacob thought he sent them to do. And Joseph told his father this evil report. So verse 4, and when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, because he had given them this coat of many colors, they hated him. They weren't just jealous, they hated him.
Yeah.
That's a powerful word. And could not speak peaceably unto him. If you hate somebody so bad, you can't hardly utter any words of peace or even say hello.
And that's what jealousy means. Jealousy is rough.
Jealousy's a rough thing. Jealousy can make you kill somebody.
Yeah.
And verse 5, and Joseph dreamed a dream. And he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more.
Even more.
So they already hated him, and now Joseph starts having these dreams. So he said to them, now see if this would, if you were one of these other brothers, if this would upset you. He said, here I pray you this dream which I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. In other words, bowed down. Their sheaves bowed down to worship his. Can you imagine? Jacob's already told his brothers he's much better. He got this coat of many colors. He's like, this guy is going to be my successor. Showing them that he's the favorite. And now he says his dream, and what God's going to do is he's going to get you all to bow down and worship me. And you can see every one of his sons is saying, I ain't never going to bow down and worship you. And they just, they turn hatred into worse anger, right?
Yeah.
And his brethren, verse 8, said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? So they're questioning him. And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his word. See, it wasn't just the dreams. It's that, why didn't he keep his mouth shut? He didn't have to tell them. But that was also in God's plan. But see, sometimes when you speak the word, people don't want to hear it,
Right.
and you'll get persecution because of it.
Right.
And we're going to see, they hated Joseph the more for his words.
Right.
And his words were of God.
Right.
His words were prophetic here.
Yeah. God wants us to interpret our dreams.
I believe that as well. God gives us dreams. We should have personal interpretation of our dreams. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And again, the sun, the moon, and the stars all bowed down to him. See, he said the 11 stars, which he was the 12th one.
Right.
Right? He said the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. So the father rebuked him, but he also kept that in mind.
Yeah, because he told him other dreams.
He told him other dreams. And this is all going to come out in his life here. But you can see how they hated him. And Jacob added to the problem by giving him all this special recognition in this coat of many colors. Verse 12, And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee. So Jacob said to Joseph, Go, I pray thee, whether it be well with thy brethren and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Now this is where they were supposed to be, right? So Joseph's already delivered an evil report. But now this is another situation. And they're supposed to be at Shechem. But they're not. And a certain man, verse 15, a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence, or from here. For I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, look at this, they conspired against him to slay him. Wow. In other words, they were conspiring to kill him. They really hated him.
Yeah.
They want to kill him. Not just persecute him, not just, wrestle him or something. They wanted to kill the guy. And they said one to another, Behold, and they're mocking him. Behold, this dreamer cometh. Right? Call him this dreamer. They don't believe his dreams. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, cast him into some pit. We will say some evil beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. So you see, these dreams really irritated them. It's sensitive, and they wanted to kill him. And then they'll tell his father that an evil beast killed him. Yeah. And Reuben heard it. Now Reuben, keep in mind, Reuben is the firstborn son. Okay, the firstborn son, by the way, is usually given the privilege, or the birthright, right?
Right.
And Reuben, and he should be the most responsible one, being the eldest, right? Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood. In other words, don't kill him. But cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he may rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, they stripped Joseph out of his coat. So they got that coat off him first. Because that's the first irritation, right? His coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Now, when I used to read it, I thought it was like, oh, they put him in a well. But what I understand now is that from my studies is that this pit that they're talking about was very narrow. Now at the bottom, almost like a vase. You'd put flowers in, but and when you get to the top, very narrow. And it was all slippery. There's no way, if somebody threw you in there, there's no way you're ever going to climb out of there.
No.
There's no way.
It's too deep.
You could almost not fit through that little narrow.
Right, real narrow.
Right? And it's got to be dark in there. Well, there's probably some light coming, but you can't see anything. The sun's shining, so there's probably some light coming down.
Not at nighttime.
But nighttime is going to be dark. But could you imagine there's hopelessness. Joseph has hopelessness. Why did they do this to him? Joseph does not hate his brothers. Why are they doing this to him, he says.
They don't have to hear nothing about any more of his dreams.
That's right. And they took him, verse 24, they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread. I don't know how they could do it. I don't know how they sat down to eat their lunch while he's in the pit. And maybe they were talking about it and joking about it. And as you're reading it, you're thinking, well, they're going to let him out. They're just trying to teach him a lesson, right? Oh, no, they hated him. And they wanted to kill him, and Reuben talked them out of it. Right. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. So basically, we're looking at a caravan, right? So that's what we got going on. And who are Ishmaelites? What is Ishmaelites? Ishmaelites were from Ishmael, right? Ishmael was who? He was the Hagar's son, the firstborn of Abraham, right? But not the firstborn of the blessing. Isaac got the blessing. So these were Ishmaelites. So Ishmaelites come in, but the Ishmaelites, they don't know anything. They didn't do it to Joseph. They saw these Ishmaelites, and what they're going to do is sell Joseph into the Ishmaelites as a slave. Because Reuben said, don't kill him, just put him in this, put him here in this pit for now. And he's trying to, now Reuben, when he said that and they did it, he's trying to think of a way to rescue him. Reuben's heart, he wanted to rescue him. Yeah. Now verse 26 says, and Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then they were passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit. So here come the Midianites. Well, who are the Midianites? Well, Midian came from Abraham's wife Keturah, right? So it was also Abraham's son. But the Midian are from Abraham's son. And so these Midianites came. They were merchants. So kind of like a caravan again, right? And maybe they were part of the same caravan. And they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. So the Midianites are involved. They're the ones that end up getting Joseph out and selling him into the hands of the Ishmaelites. Behold, of course, they paid, when these tribes of Israel, when these sons of Israel, when they sold Joseph, they sold him, they got the silver, right?
So what you think, they split it among them?
Oh, I'm sure they had. Yeah, they would have had to split it among them. They don't want to make everybody angry at them by cheating them. And Reuben returned to... Now, Reuben wasn't there. See, it says here in verse 29, Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit.
Yeah, they took him out.
And he tore his clothes. And you see this through the Bible. When they ripped their clothes, it says rent his clothes. That's an expression of like complete hopelessness, despair. What can happen next? And he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not, and whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. Well, of course he knows the coat of many colors. It was very distinguishable, right?
Right.
They're tricking their father. They sold his favorite son. They can't tell him that. They didn't actually slay him, but they slayed a goat. They took the blood and they put it all over like he had been ravished by a wild beast, right? And in verse 33, and Jacob knew it and said, it is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes. So he tore his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And the irony here is, do you remember Jacob, how Jacob got the birth blessing, or the blessing, first, the birthright blessing from his father Isaac? Remember, there was some deception going on because his mother put on these goat skins, right? So that when Joseph touched him, he would say, oh, this is my hairy son. Remember, we said he was like a werewolf, right? Well, he's being conned by the same, a very similar tactic. A goat. Here's a goat again. A goat's blood. And they're acting all innocent, like, oh, we found this coat. I wonder what happened. They're all sitting there going, we wonder what happened. And Jacob's like, a beast must have devoured him, right? And they don't tell his father. So his son goes into mourning because they figure his father's never going to see that son again. He'll get over it. He'll get over it. That's what they're figuring. And all his sons and all his daughters, verse 35, rose up to comfort him. But nobody told him the truth. Right? This is hypocrisy here.
Yeah.
His sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, for I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. There's obviously a caravan. It mentions the Ishmaelites, but then it mentions the Midianites. It might have been in the same caravan. They were merchants. And remember, it was the Midianites that got him out, that got Joseph out of the pit, right? But it says the Ishmaelites here sold him to Potiphar. So it's like they're both involved with this, in this trade deal. And Potiphar's important in Egypt. Potiphar's an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. In other words, he's pretty significant. He's a very powerful person and probably lives in the palace. Captain of the guard. I mean, Egypt was the strongest military nation at the time. And he's captain of the guard. That's important. Now we're going to skip over chapter 38. Go into chapter 39, verse 1. Because we want to see what happens with Potiphar, right? And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph. It doesn't appear that the Lord was with Joseph, does it? All that things that have happened to this child, but God has the nerve to say the Lord was with Joseph. And what we see by that comment is that this was all designed by the Lord. God had a plan, and it was necessary that he go through this. Just like it was necessary that Jesus went through what he did for your salvation.
Step by step.
God set out the plan, and it was necessary for the plan to be executed that way. The Lord was with Joseph, verse 2, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master of the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So, this guy's got a slave, and he's noticing that Joseph, everything Joseph does, it's almost like everything he touches turns to gold. You know that phrase. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all he had, he put into his hands. In other words, Potiphar put this slave boy in charge of everything he had, and he's a very high, uppity up captain of the royal guard living in the palace.
Right.
And he put Joseph in charge of everything. That seems like quite a promotion from the pit.
It is.
And you would think, well, that was God's plan. And now we should see, because God is blessing him, and we should see only good things happen, right? Well, look at verse 5. And it came to pass, from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. In other words, he trusted Joseph so much he didn't even know what was going on. This is a mistake that a lot of people make. You hear, they trust their accountant or something, and then the next thing you know, the business is under the accountants in another country. And ripped him, and he's not coming back because then he'll go thrown in the penitentiary. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. So Potiphar's wife, he's over everything in Potiphar's house, and this doesn't mean his house. Potiphar had many servants. He's over all the servants, and his wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. Joseph's about he's about maybe 13 or 14 years old or something. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me."
Uh-oh.
She must have really thought he was cute.
Yep. He wanted some of that leprechaun.
But he refused and said unto his master's wife, "Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand." In other words, he's telling his wife, my master really trusts me. I can't have anything to do with you. Right. Verse 9, there is none greater in this house than I. Well, it's kind of slap in the face of his wife, right? But it's true. Right? She didn't know everything Joseph knew. Neither has he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? You notice it did say sin against Potiphar, sin against my master, sin against God. And when you sin against whoever you sin against, you're also sinning against God.
That's right.
And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, or day after day this happened. She keeps coming to Joseph saying, lie with me, lie with me, lie with me. Sounds like she's a nymphomaniac or something, right?
It was.
He hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. Now you can see there's other men there, which were servants, right? And she caught him, but they're not there. She's all alone. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. In other words, rather than commit the adultery, which it would have been because she's married, he ran, and she had a hold of his garment. So it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and they had fled forth, or he ran away. Listen, watch this woman. You got to be careful about a woman.
Amen.
I mean, I'm telling you, it might look good, but watch what she does. Now she knows every time he ran away from her. Every time he said, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. He's faithful to his master, right? She called unto the men of her house. In other words, they were outside. Remember, they weren't in the house. And spake unto them, saying, see, he has brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me. And I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard, I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. So she's going to frame him.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here.
That's right.
Okay? He didn't do anything wrong. But she's saying he raped her. That's what's happening. And she puts the garment on the side until her husband comes home, because she's going to tell her husband that Joseph raped me.
It's a false allegation, right?
False accusing, yes. False allegation. And she spake, and by the way, grounds for that sin in Egypt at the time was death penalty.
Yeah, I know.
So she is, we know he doesn't get the death penalty because of God's provision, but God's mercy, because God has a plan, right? But Potiphar doesn't execute, and he's the captain of the guard. He's the captain over the prison.
Right.
He could easily have him put to death. But let's see what happens. She spake unto him according to these words, saying that the Hebrew servant which thou brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled out. So she's telling him the same story.
Right.
It came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison. Now he's the captain over it. He's right. He's over all the prison. He put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. This wasn't any old penitentiary. This prison was exclusively for the king's prisoners. Who's the king? Pharaoh. Right? So Pharaoh's prisoners are in a special, particular prison, and Potiphar throws Joseph into that prison, and he was there in the prison. Verse 21, but the Lord was with him, or was with Joseph. It doesn't seem like the Lord is with him, does it? And I guess the message we're supposed to get out of this is, as we're going through stuff, it often does not seem like the Lord is with us.
Right.
But he is with us. And sometimes what we have to go through in our life is for our own good.
Right.
I mean, one of our prayers is we want God to use us, to touch the lives of others. And by going through certain doors and trials in our life, God is forming us to accomplish some task for the kingdom of God. So, verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Now, like we said, he should have been put to death. So you can see the favor.
Right.
And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. They must have, he probably knew. This guy's the keeper of the prison. He certainly knew Potiphar because he was captain over it all, right? And Potiphar put him in there, and he knew that the accusation, but he knew that Joseph ran everything Potiphar had, and just blessed, and the Lord blessed him and blessed him and blessed him.
Potiphar was under him too, right?
No, Potiphar's over the keeper of the prison. Okay? So the keeper of the prison commits to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. How would you if you were sent to prison and the guy put you in charge of all the prisoners? That's a pretty good place, right? Yeah. And whatsoever, the warden, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So now, the same thing's happening to the prison, the head of the prison, the keeper of the prison, because he's being blessed, and he doesn't have to do any work, because Joseph's got it all under control. Yeah. He's running the whole establishment, right?
That's right.
He may not be the first one that had to be sent to prison.
Well, yeah, with that wife the way she was. It doesn't tell us about anybody else, though. Maybe that's why he wasn't killed. Maybe Potiphar didn't believe his wife. Yeah. Maybe it did happen before. Again, and again, and again. And Potiphar was like, well, I got to do something. Right. Yeah. Because she claims he raped her. He probably asked Joseph, did you do it? And she said, no, I ran. So he puts him into, and maybe Potiphar, when he put him into prison, told the keeper of the prison, hey, this guy's a good guy. I have to put him in here. But put him in charge of stuff, because you will be blessed because of it.
She had to be a woman full of lust.
She had to be.
Yeah, she had to be.
Yeah. We don't know anything more than what is said, but she was wanting. But he didn't want it.
Jezebel.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So we're in chapter 40, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. That's Pharaoh, right? And Pharaoh was wroth or angry against the two of his officers, against the chief of the butler and the chief of the bakers. Now, there's not just one butler and one baker in the palace. This is the chief of the butlers and the chief of the bakers. And something happened, and so they were thrown in prison also. We don't know what happened. And the Pharaoh doesn't know who's guilty. He throws them in. So I think what happened, now I don't know for sure, but I think you got a baker involved and a butler involved. I think someone tried to poison the Pharaoh.
It's possible.
And it was revealed, obviously Pharaoh didn't get poisoned, but he thought, well, either the chief butler or the chief baker had something to do with this. Right? So he threw them into prison, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. He put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. That's Potiphar, right? Into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So, by chance, just by chance, Joseph's in the prison, and these two guys are thrown into prison alongside him. And these two people that are put there become very influential, or very, very important in the whole scheme, the plan of his life. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them. He served them, and they continued a season in ward, and they dreamed a dream. both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, looked upon them, and behold, that they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look you so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. So Joseph's saying, well, God has the interpretation, right? Amen. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. And it was as though it budded, and her blossom shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. So Joseph is now going to interpret the dream. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But, you could almost add please here. But think on me when it shall be well with thee. Now, so according to the interpretation, he's going to get out of prison and return back to his job. So when it happens, remember me is what he's saying, right? Think of me and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me to the Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Right? For indeed, and then he goes and tells him, that, how did I get here? He says, I'm innocent. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation that he gave was good, now sometimes we hold back. We like, well, I'm not gonna ask for advice until I see what he tells the other person, right? So he said, well, I want some good words from my dream too. So the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good. He said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Doesn't sound too bad, right? So he's carrying him on his head, and then in the dream, and the birds ate the meat off of his head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Very similar, right? Within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. That's not the interpretation he wanted, I am sure. And it came to pass, and Joseph doesn't bother telling him, now when you this happens, remember me. Right? And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. I wonder if they all sang happy birthday to Pharaoh. Happy birthday to you. Happy.
That wasn't sung
right?
at that time.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it came from Egypt.
Maybe they had a different song.
I don't know what they had. But they had a great feast. I mean, Pharaoh threw this great feast. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again. And he gave him the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but he forgot him. So now what happens? So we go down to 41:1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So 2 full years now passed since this incident. Joseph's still in the prison. that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. Behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, the 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. And Pharaoh awoke. So what's happening? You have like 7 really fat, healthy, meaty cows. All right? And then you have these 7 that come up after, and they are so skinny they look like they're dying, but they come over and they gobble up, they actually devour the 7 healthy ones. That's what's happening in the dream. And Pharaoh woke up. Now he knows, he's got the feeling this is not good.
It's from God.
We don't know. I mean, he doesn't know what it means, but he's like, this is important. Yeah. God is telling me something. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold. So he went back to sleep. Now, we don't know if the dream happened on the same night. Sometimes you will get dreams, right, one behind the other. Sometimes there will be a day between or something, and the dreams will connect. And you can't interpret, I'll tell you, you cannot interpret the dreams sometimes until you get to 2 or 3 dreams in a row, and then all the pieces fit together. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. It's very similar, isn't it? And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. I would say it's a nightmare. Yeah. And it came to pass. So what happened here? 7, either corn or wheat, or I think it was wheat. 7 came up, and they were very full. They were very healthy. And then 7 weak, miserable-looking ones came up, and they devoured the others. Just like happened with the cows, right? And Pharaoh woke up, and it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Now, I believe it was troubled because he thought, the gods are trying to warn me about something. And he didn't have a good feeling about it. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Almost reminds you in the book of Daniel, right? Daniel went through the same kind of thing. Then Pharaoh, the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Okay, it's 2 years later. But Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And he dreamed a dream in one night. I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream, and it was there with us a young man, a Hebrew servant, to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. In other words, what he told us is what happened. Right? And so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. And that's exactly what the interpretation was. And Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. He's like, I got this guy in prison. Pharaoh may have actually knew who Joseph was, because again, Potiphar lived in the palace, captain of the guard, right? Joseph, he knew Joseph was his special servant. He probably knew the whole story. In fact, when it happened, Pharaoh said, well, we should give him the death penalty. And Potiphar said, no, I don't trust my wife. That's my feeling on it. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily. Hastily means quick, right? Like a while ago. Out of the dungeon. So he brought him swiftly out of the dungeon. He shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. Well, if you're coming before the leader of the world at that time, you better shave. Maybe put on a suit and a tie, right? And that's what he's doing. He's cleaning up. He's probably taking a bath and putting some deodorant on and, maybe some Old Spice. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And this Joseph, he doesn't take any credit. And one problem we have in the church today, many people are talented. All of our talents we got from God.
Amen.
Sometimes we step out and God just blesses us so much. And I've been in this situation before where you do something and you get the feeling that, hey, I'm pretty talented. You're looking at the gift rather than God.
Right.
You are not here to bring everybody and say, oh, look at me. Look how well I do this. Draw attention to yourself. You're supposed to be bringing people to God. Right? So he says that right now. It's not, the power to do this is not in me, but God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And you can see his faith talking. He doesn't know yet the meaning. He doesn't know if God's going to do it. But yet he said to Pharaoh, God will give Pharaoh the answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. Behold, there came out of the river 7 kine, fat flesh, and well favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill favored, and lean flesh, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt, for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. So I awoke. In other words, here's these skinny, sickly-looking ones, seven sickly cows. They gobbled up the healthy ones, and they still didn't look any bigger.
Right, they look the same.
And I saw in my dreams, and behold, 7 ears came up, and one stalk full and good. And behold, the 7 ears withered thin and blasted with the east wood sprung up after them. The thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And as I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of the Pharaoh is one. In other words, you got 2 dreams, but one meaning. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years. The 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he shows to Pharaoh. Behold, there shall come, now here's the interpretation of putting both these dreams together. Behold, there came 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And I'll tell you what, if there's no food in Egypt, there's not going to be any food anywhere else.
Right.
Because Egypt is, that is the place. That's the main place. It's the world empire.
Right.
Not really world empire, but it's the largest military. Pharaoh's the greatest man in the world. And for that, the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Well, this is good news, but it's not so good news in a way, because the 7 years of blessing is good, but those 7 years of famine says it's going to wipe you out. And nobody will even remember the 7 years of good.
Right.
And now therefore let Pharaoh Look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, and the flood shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. In other words, what he's saying is, Joseph says, you put somebody in charge who's very wise and knows what to do, knows how to handle this. For the first 7 years of plenty, he needs to take all the plenty, all the extra, and put it up in the storage to prepare for the 7 years of famine that's coming. Right? So the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this? Is a man in whom the Spirit of God is? So he recognized the Spirit of God's in this guy. Nobody, all of his wise men, his magician, nobody could tell him. But he knows that this is true. This dream that he said is true. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house. Now this is interesting because Joseph started out, basically Jacob put him in that position, right? He's sold into slavery, and Potiphar puts him into that position. Then he's put into prison, and the keeper of the prison puts him into that position, where everything's under his control. And now Pharaoh says, thou shalt be over my house. In other words, you're going to have everything, control over everything in the palace, in my empire. And according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. You know what this sounds like? What would Pharaoh do to his son? Right? That's the place of his son, to be second in command. So I suspect Pharaoh did not have a son. And as we go through, you'll see this. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh, watch this. What's happening here is, this is a blood covenant going on. Pharaoh is making a covenant, and it stands out as an adoption covenant. Now, as I read this, I think you'll see this. What was that?
The same one that put him in jail.
No, Pharaoh didn't throw him in jail. Potiphar did. But now Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and he put it upon Joseph's hand. The ring represented, it was a signet ring. It represented the authority of Pharaoh. In other words, when he put that ring on his finger, everything that it gave Joseph the ability to make the orders, finalize the orders in Pharaoh's name. So he was second in command. He puts that ring upon Joseph's hand, and he arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and he put a gold chain upon his neck. Well, this just reeks of covenant, because what they used to do, you might not notice, in the early Christianity, early Christians used to take a lamb's pouch and put the Gospel of John in it and wear it around their neck as a symbol of their covenant. And when they went through persecution, they would touch that. Remind them about the Gospel of John. Remind them of the covenant they have with God. See, this is a covenant. This Christianity thing, this is a covenant. Sometimes they would take, now, the wealthy, if they were in a covenant, they would take like this medallion, they would put the terms of it inside, what do they call that? Amulet, right? They'd have an amulet, and they open it up, and they would put the words of that covenant in that and put it around their neck. So Joseph wore all the authority. He had a ring on his finger. He was dressed with the palace robes. He looked like Pharaoh coming down the street.
Right.
I mean, for all intents purposes, he looked like Pharaoh. And then he had a gold chain with an amulet that he wore, which had all the words that Pharaoh said and entrusted the government into his hand. And he made him, verse 43, to ride in the second chariot which he had. Now you notice, he did not the first chariot. That was Pharaoh. But the second chariot, you can't get any better than that.
No.
In fact, doesn't this sound like Jesus? When he says he's going to put you will rule and reign with him? Make you kings and priests in his kingdom? He made him to ride in the second chariot, which he had, and these people that would follow him, whenever he went out, servants followed him, and they cried before him, "Bow the knee!" And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. We don't realize that, like in the millennial kingdom, there'll be flesh and blood people living there. There'll be babies. There'll be husbands and wives getting married. But then there will be the children of God in their glorious bodies. And as we walk in our glorious bodies throughout that land, servants will say, "Bow the knee." We will look like we're in the form of God. The Bible says we will be like him. We'll look like him. But what I want you to see is Pharaoh has raised him up into all this glory and made him like the son he didn't have. See, I believe this position should have been reserved for his son. I believe what this is an adoption. And he goes another step. He goes a step further. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt." In other words, nobody will do anything unless it's approved by you. I'm giving you control over all the empire. Only I'm in charge over you. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah. He gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. This is especially important as well, because this priest, Potiphera, priest of On, he's like the high priest of Egypt. His daughter is very important. He's given his daughter to Joseph as a wife. And the offspring of the priest through his daughter makes Joseph's children, and Joseph brings them into the priesthood. So he is a priest and a king. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons, before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare him. So he had 2 sons. And these 2 sons were regarded as priestly offspring. not anyone can marry this woman. Pharaoh is the one who gave her to wife. Not everyone could be you couldn't just, in Egypt, you couldn't just decide, well, when I grow up, I'm going to be a priest. Mm-hmm. In our country, you could say, when I grow up, I'm going to become a pastor. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. You have to be royalty. He made Joseph royalty, and then he gave her a wife that was royalty. Mm-hmm. Remember, Pharaoh was very close to the priesthood because Pharaoh was believed to be God in the flesh. Mm-hmm. If you know anything about Egyptian religion. So they were very close. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God said, He hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second son he called Ephraim. For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had foretold. Or had said. And the dearth was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. You see that? Mm-hmm. Only Egypt had food.
Everybody had to come to Egypt.
And that's what's going to happen. Now think about this. Some of the people that are going to end up in Egypt because of this is Jacob and his family. Right? They're going to end up coming down there out of necessity.
Got to eat.
And Abraham said, or God told Abraham, your family is going to go to a strange land. But what I want you to see in this covenant that was made with Joseph by Pharaoh and raising him to the second in command, this covenant, when you had a blood covenant, which I think this is a blood covenant of adoption, when you made that covenant, you couldn't change your mind. When two people enter into covenant, it's been sworn. Joseph had that preeminent position. Evidently, either he died and he never became Pharaoh, or Pharaoh's own son was born and ended up becoming Pharaoh.
That's the only way.
By every right, Joseph had authority over the whole kingdom, right, of Egypt. Well, then when a Pharaoh, and we'll see that with Moses, when a Pharaoh rose up that knew not Joseph, and he began persecuting the Jews, or the Israelites, right? When you enter into a blood covenant, you're also pulling in your gods. Pharaoh brought in his gods, his belief in his gods, and Joseph has the God of gods, right? The real, true God. And when they entered covenant, the gods were brought into that covenant. So later on, when they begin whipping and beating upon the children of Israel, that's a dishonoring of the covenant. The words, a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, could simply mean that this Pharaoh would not honor the covenant. And what that did is, remember the prophecy God says is, I will judge that nation and I will bring them out, right? Calamity is going to come on that nation. God, it opened the door for God to go after Pharaoh and the armies of Egypt. God didn't just come in there to beat up on them. People, when they read the Bible, they don't understand. A covenant was involved. Joseph was second of Egypt. And Pharaoh, the new Pharaoh, turned his back on the covenant and began persecuting the Israelites. And it calls God into that to deal with that. And that's how God came to deal with it. And remember, the gods of Egypt were brought in with the God of Joseph, right? And you'll see that when those plagues come of Moses, every plague had to do, it was actually aimed at one of those Egyptian gods to show that those Egyptian gods had no power. Verse 54, so the 7 years of good and plenty are over, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph has said, and the dearth was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread, and when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses, and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt, and all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in the land. And verse 1 in chapter 42 says, now when Jacob saw there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do you look one upon another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. In other words, he said, why are you just looking at each other? Why don't you do something? He said, behold, I've heard that there's corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt.